Welcome everybody to tonight's event Regards croisés at Moudam on the exhibition of Léonore Antunes, which is currently in show in the pavilion of Moudam. We are very glad to share tonight our conversation with you, actually on 6 terms about an hexagonal pavilion with Antunes sculptures. You might see, if you are online or if you are in the audience room, 2 screens with the exhibition room, or you might attend being in the exhibition, so you will see the exhibition in real time, but only listening to both of us, which will be fine. Anyhow. Milica Topalovic joined our session from Zurich, where she currently works and lives with her family. Milica is researcher and teacher in architecture and territorial planning at ETH since about 15 years, currently associate professor at the ETH Zurich, after having spent for about 4 years between 11 and 15 in Singapore in the Future City Laboratory. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for being here too. So today, Dora, she's dancing, performing as a response to our conversation by her movements in the pavilion. Thank you, Dora. Myself, I'm Carol Schmidt. I'm an architect living and working in Luxembourg. For 15 years, I have been leading an architecture office called Polaris together with my partner, François. Currently, I am teaching at the university in Luxembourg in the Master in Architecture, next to my project leading job at the Administration of Public Works. So our conversation should last for about 1 hour, and it will be packed into 6 sections, 6 terms. We will spend approximately 10 minutes on each term. Okay, now we start with the first term, which is about generation. So I just make a brief introduction. Milica and myself, actually, we met at the end of the 90s in Amsterdam at the research lab, which was called Berlage Institute, where we studied together for about 2 years. I was belonging to Generation 9. And Milica, she was actually belonging to Generation 10. In the meantime, there have been 30 generations being graduated. And so we are very happy actually to share today this idea that we belong to the same generation, actually the same as Léonore Antunes, which is also born, or at least was a child during the 70s as we were. So maybe Milica, you can tell us a little bit how it was growing up in Belgrade in the 70s.
Yes, thank you, Carol. So it was interesting to discover as we met actually, and I think used the opportunity to encounter each other once again and let's say revisit our friendship after many years. And one of the first things we understood was that Léonore basically is the same generation. And I think we began to wonder, is there something that creates a kind of a shared experience among us, let's say? What separates a generation of the 70s, and does this experience of, let's say, growing up in the 70s bring us together or create a kind of similar worldview or a value system that we share to this day? And so we decided to speak a little bit about the 70s, and in preparation I started to think back to that time. Well, I can tell you that I grew up in Belgrade in a socialist country called Yugoslavia at the time, in a street that was actually called Boulevard of Yuri Gagarin. This betrays a kind of a proximity to the Soviet bloc. So we are also children of a Cold War. I mean, if we are looking at the kind of shared memories and experiences. I remember, of course, modern architecture. This is one of the resonances to the work of Leonor Antunes. I mean, modern architecture, modern space, which kind of created the framework of the daily lives at the time. New apartment, new appliances, new uncomfortable furniture, new modern school, new children playground, etc., new landscape, new trees, and so on. I remember technology, good TV, radio that, let's say, dominated our life. I mean, in comparison to Dora, who is tonight with us, no fixed phones, no internet, no computers in the daily life. So let's say we have those memories, right? We have the memories of different kind of communication. I think we were also raised with environmental themes. I think the acid rain, the depletion of ozone layer back then. So let's say those are the themes that resonate still, I think, in a different way. Perhaps I would say we were raised with, or I remember distinctly, economic crisis. I remember power blackouts. I remember rationing. I remember driving on odd and even numbers according to license plate numbers. I remember, let's say, I mean, we would say today probably rising Thatcherism as a kind of a broad political phenomenon that originates in the late in the times of economic crisis. I remember punk movement very distinctly in that, in that, to say so, modern space. And I remember having more time, everybody having more time, more time to waste, to do nothing, and so on. So how was it growing up in Luxembourg?
Well, I believe that even though I was in a non-socialist country, growing actually up in a very conservative landscape, which was strongly run by still Catholic socialist parties, I had a very similar feel about that time. Actually, my city was a small city, it was not the capital, and but it belonged to the industrial part of our country where there was steel being produced. And the landscape I saw from my balcony, because I lived in an apartment, was actually gray, because the fine dust would, be constantly reproduced. And so I was growing up in pollution, in heavy pollution. Of course, I remember very well also the upraise of the punk culture. But when I was small, I didn't really set it back into a historical moment. I just saw these guys, these youngsters, having these funny hair, and these the new type of music popping up indeed, and other ways of dressing, and it was this new future, generation actually that we were belonging to. In my particular case, I wasn't introduced into a very bourgeois milieu. I grew up actually basically in an environment where there were many workers' kids next to kids from engineers, basically. So it was in a way colorful and homogeneous at the same time. But it really had a great impact on my perception of cities, because I still have a lot of sympathy towards these industrial environments and landscapes. They do not represent this classic beauty of historical city centers or something like that, but they had this, roughness, but also potential, right, which was already there. So that was actually basically the landscape I grew up, at the same time.
But then it's interesting perhaps to remember our generation at the Berlach, right? So we were together in the master studies, and I think we shaped again a kind of a generational approach to architecture, isn't that right?
I believe so. Yes, I very much remember that in the 90s there was this huge happiness of getting borders open, right? Well, this was basically the part in western part of Europe, maybe less, but since you were in Amsterdam, I believe you could enjoy this too. And
yeah, so.
yes, so that actually raised a lot of hope in our minds. I do remember this border issue became something really, really important on one hand. And then the other thing, which is, I think, very strongly related to our generation, was about the transdisciplinary, the rise of new media and technologies, which would, completely reshape our way of designing and thinking architecture, basically. And so we had a lot of discussions on how to use them, the ones that were really enthusiastic and the other ones were maybe less enthusiastic. I remember
that was a real debate, right? This was like kind of how to approach technology, and I think there were kind of let's say tech architects among us, those that embrace complexity and the kind of aesthetics of this kind of technological design, parametric design, and those that that kind of held back from all that.
Absolutely, yeah. Which I remember Pier Vittorio writing and presenting his manifesto against Photoshop. And,
yes.
This was a really great moment in the audience, because Photoshop was such a salutary, tool. We were all so happy. And he kind of, well, maybe we should talk about matter now.
Exactly. The second term is matter. Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
So, it came immediately, right? So Leonor's work is about matter, about material. It's also about details, right? So it's, in a way, it's very architectural. It's refined in its construction, in its making, no?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a strong feeling when you enter her installations full of sculptures, full of perfection, actually, and which embrace you, in such a calm and serene. It's extremely actually serene in its appearance. And I believe that what she tried to achieve is to show the beauty and the simplicity of all these materials by using craft. So I just, if you agree, I just would like to read a very small extract of a book which has been written by Quinn Latimer, where she made a collection of essays and poems, and there is one about Leonor, and it's beautiful. I can't read it completely, but I just offer a very, very small insight. It says, in the Kunsthalle Basel exhibition poster von Thunner's exhibition, the sepia-tinged image shows a courtyard enclosed by walls and trees and leaves and light, a kind of pavilion. A woman waits there like a traveler might wait for a train. If she, as a traveler, though she is also an artist. I do not remember seeing a poster von Thunnes exhibition, Sculptures for Traveling, at the Kunstverein Harburger Bahnhof in Hamburg. Let's imagine one together. A glass pavilion, a flood of travelers, a sign that reads club. Inside the narrow glass walls, an artist unpacking her suitcase, laying out her materials on the floor. Leather, light, brass, wood, rope, silence, distance. She begins to assemble them at last. So this text actually is extracted out of this book and is called The Artist and Thunnes, or Last Words on the Last Days of Sculptures for Traveling. Mm-hmm. Actually, the author visited her pavilion, and being there, she got inspired, and she found room and space for her own poetry. So
I'm familiar with the text as well, and I was really struck with this comparison of artist with the traveler, and yeah. I had actually been thinking whether traveling is a metaphor for any kind of artist, or traveler is a metaphor for any kind of artist, or perhaps specifically to a woman artist. And I was wondering to what extent, I mean, traveling certainly is a kind of to say so, demand of contemporary art, but I think in the case of Leonor, I am rather fascinated by the kind of transience and the kind of lightness of the gesture, right, and of the let's say details and the procedures which I relate to the kind of a feminine or perhaps feminist design experiences. No.
Yeah, it definitely, yes, certainly is. Maybe there's another thing which strikes me a lot is about the fact that she uses pure material in a way, this kind of honesty and authenticity of the material which are reworked, and reworked in a very sophisticated and yet simple way, and almost as opposed to this Western trend in culture to mix and blend materials again and again in order to develop the most sophisticated technologies until they finally become unrecognizable. So, I believe that, these materials, when they become so sophisticated and that one cannot see really what it is anymore, the chance of getting it back in the new circle of use is very limited. Even though physically speaking it's always possible, right? So, and I think she has really a stand with it. This is sort of a very maybe female resistance against this trend, of anti-ecological way of using materials. I don't know how
kind of composite against composite materials, let's say.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think this is something at least which comes out, but nevertheless the poetry is maybe is even stronger, is even. And I believe that maybe leads us to the next term, because I think we can make a transition to chance. Being in Antone's exhibition, I feel relieved. I feel space for interpretation and freedom, actually. Freedom of movement, freedom of thought. And this is maybe something which makes me think about the term of chance, because it's chance as an opportunity, but it's also chance as something which you cannot control and which possibly can happen. So I just want to refer maybe to this physician, as a small provocation, Jean Cavaillés. He was a physician who died actually during the Second World War as a resistant, but just before dying, he published a last publication, and where he was actually stating that there is no mathematical definition of chance. So for him, there is a scientific certitude of being able to cover all and everything into rules and knowledge. He says, actually, I can offer this quote. It's in French. Il n'y a pas de définition mathématique du hasard. Le dernier sens du hasard, c'est l'ignorance. Dire qu'une suite est due au hasard, c'est affirmer qu'on ne pourra pas trouver de loi mathématique pour la succession de ces termes. And this is typically, a stand of Western culture, I believe, where there is very strong faith into solving all and everything by rules, by equations maybe, and where the knowledge, of course, belongs to the strong and gives a lot of power as well. Whereas maybe in other cultures, one would find the potential of the hazard, of the chance, chance of the unexpected, and maybe I just stop and just refer them maybe to Stéphane Mallarmé, who wrote in 1897, Un coup de dé jamais n'abolira le hasard. And where he said, and this is French again, I'm sorry for this, but he says actually, it's also about numbers and chance. He says, c'était le nombre issu stellaire, exista-t-il autrement qu'hallucination éparse d'agonie? Commença-t-il et cessa-t-il, sourdant que niais et clos quand apparut enfin, par quelque profusion répandue en rareté, se chiffra-t-il? Évidence de la somme, pour peu qu'une illumina-t-il, ce serait pire, non, davantage ni moins, indifféremment mais autant, le hasard. So, what about chance? What do you think?
I mean, it's fascinating. Let's say as designers and architects, right? So I think we are familiar with that. Let's say creative process that very often involves chance, right? But in ways that are not apparent, no, in the finished product. And I think this is interesting when looking at Leonor's work, that, to both of us, the term chance came across very strongly, because we wondered about the process and to what extent the kind of a let's say control, or what is the logic, what are to say, so the rules behind it, right? And I also I mean these kind of creative rules, right? And to explain that, I have this example that I liked very much. I remember in the student days. So there was this book published, I think also in the late 70s by Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt. So it was a kind of artistic collaboration that was discovered accidentally, where they developed independently from each other cards to help them in a way orchestrate or bring in chance or a kind of possibility to decide in the creative process when things get difficult, let's say. And the cards are fascinating because I think perhaps every designer, to say so, every artist in a broad sense, I mean also architects and musicians and so on, work with those to say so individually developed rules. And some of the cards that are very entertaining, and I think we recognize them, like discard an axiom, no?
Mm-hmm. I remember that one.
Let's get rid of the main idea, right? Yeah. Or repetition as a form of change, right? Embrace repetition, or distorting time, no? Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Also architecturally, what might happen, or destroy nothing. This is a fascinating one. Nobody will tell you that in architecture school, right? Or destroy the most important thing. On the other hand, you hear your teachers so often, don't be sentimental, right? Change your project, right? And so on, or be dirty and so on, like pollute the canon and so on. And I think this was a certain elegance about Leonor's work is there, which it is not easy to say so to read in terms of a creative process, right? So we were to say so both wondering on the element of chance. Exactly. And I think of course the kind of chance, that also extends back to the question of matter and to the kind of a male and female, to say so, strategies in terms of handling form, right, and handling material there's say so fascinating histories and examples. Your favorite is John Cage. If you want to speak about
I do. You try to. No. Yes, I of course, John Cage. Of course, there is this. His chance, controlled chance operation mechanisms is something which fascinates me for many years. And but of course, I'm not the only one. There was this beautiful exhibition recently at Mudam about Morris's work, who'd been also actually who was actually actively engaged with Cage about these mechanisms. Mm-hmm. So no, of course, I think that there is another dimension which I think due to time I would like to maybe to switch over, Milica, if we could go and I think you want to say something about nature, which is also very present in Leonor's work, maybe.
Well, yeah. Why? Okay, let me try to explain why was nature important. Well, I think nature, let's say, as we've encountered Eleanor restoration, and one of the terms was nature. And obviously, I think there's a kind of certain dedication to nature through material, right? Yes. So let's say through the choice of material, and also through the craft, or through the handcraft. There is, I think, modernism is let's say, present as a kind of a aesthetic sensibility, but I think also the kind of nostalgia, which is, exists, nostalgia for the kind of pre-modern craft traditions which are absorbed, in modern architecture, modern art, over through various, to say so, artistic trajectories. And I think that I mean, I would perhaps refer to, in opening this this kind of wide and I think perhaps difficult theme of nature. I think what is perhaps interesting to say that you know, we live, I think, in a time when we are perhaps in the moment when we have to reconsider, or where we are in the process of reconsidering the kind of wide cultural perspective on nature, no? And I think if we talk about Anthropocene, I think we talk about basically about exhaustion of worldviews, and the worldviews imply the kind of relationship of the human society toward the world ecology or nature, right? And the kind of unpacking the history of nature is a difficult and I think fascinating exercise. And I think this is also where Leonor's work resonates, right? Because this kind of clear and committed, let's say, handling of materials and perhaps touching this point where, you know, the modern or the progressive can be in contact with, you know, the natural, or perhaps let's call it sustainable. You know, this is a kind of a very, very I think sensitive point for, you know, for, I would say, you know, for not only architects, but for, you know, civilization in general, right? I mean, can we design architecture which is, you know, emission free, which is not about, you know, reinforced concrete or other, to say so, you know, technologies, composite materials, as you said, et cetera, et cetera. And there is this, I mean, there are, I think, I mentioned, I wanted to open up this topic of the history of nature. And one book in particular was interesting. Carolyn Merchant, a philosopher and also feminist writer in the 1980s, came up with the book, The Death of Nature, Women, Ecology and the Scientific Revolution. And what is, so she precisely tries to do this kind of a sweeping history where her thesis is that actually the shifting view of nature is a historic process, and she traces it back approximately 300 years, and she says there is a 300-year-old roughly shift in from seeing the earth as a living organism towards seeing it as a machine. Mm-hmm. That was consequently used to justify industrial capitalism and domination of, you know, of both nature and women in her perspective. So she says the exploration of images and metaphors directly linking nature and women, she in this book she in fact debates these changing attitudes towards science and technology. Mm-hmm. And the history, I think what is fascinating is that history begins with the discovery of the New World, the late 15th century, and you know, goes through incredible number of examples from, you know, Newton to Leibniz, through which in her point of view, this mechanistic worldview was installed. And a couple of, I think, you know, a couple of, I mean, where it leads to, you know, bringing us today to the present day. I think we are still, I would say, completely entrenched in that discussion. I mean, if we look, for instance, on the work of Bruno Latour in Facing Gaia, we have, you know, practically the same kind of question mark presented in the book. So basically, is it possible to, let's say, reconfigure our cultural paradigms around nature in order to, let's say, gradually begin kind of modifying other fields of activity, you know, from politics to economy, etc., etc. And the notion, of course, which is also implicated is Gaia, and there is a link to James Lovelock. So let's say, is it possible to I think to say it in a provocative terms, but these are also Latourian terms. Is it possible to remember, or under our conditions, reinstall a kind of a new natural religion that would, let's say, inform the kind of shift that we are looking for in the face of, let's say, global environmental crisis.
Yeah. It's a big question. I think it leads us to the idea of progress, right? That's what we need. We need to address progress now, because I believe it's a matter of civilization, maybe, where we can find some, you know, hints also in the history where Western civilization became a kind of one religion for the whole planet, in a way, you know, about it's almost arrogance to pretend being able to conduct society through scientific knowledge, certain governance, you know, the economy which goes with it, and of course the, how to say that, centralization of capital among a few, you know, which has been, you know, delivering for several centuries. Whereas when we look, you know, if we really look to the way how things are built, maybe we can learn something. If we, I just, you know, maybe I can just give you the example of a Shinto shrine, you know, in Japan, which is something which is repeatedly, it's a shrine which is repeatedly turned down and rebuilt, actually every 20 years, and this over the past 1,300 years. So what happens is that the Shinto belief is based on the fact that they believe into the death and the renewal of nature, and the impermanence of all the things. And as a way of passing building technologies, actually, from one generation to the other. And this is a whole process which occurs every 20 years. So which means that one single person in this community has most possibly the chance to learn about rebuilding this shrine for 2 or 3 times. So if we look at Japanese culture, we do discover this, you know, belief into tradition and the knowledge which goes with it. We see it in the way how they handle craft, how they handle certain building materials. But we also see that they have no trouble of going with the new technologies as well. So there is not this dialectical view on either or, right? So they have this capacity to embrace the whole history in a way, and stay connected with nature. So they don't oppose nature as something which is, you have the humankind and you have the nature. No, actually humankind belongs to nature, is nature. I don't know.
I love the example of Shinto shrine, and it actually reminded me of John Berger, and I think I think probably everybody in the audience will know John Berger for one or another of his books or The Ways of Seeing. Berger actually there is a biographical moment which was deeply fascinating to me. So somewhere in the mid-70s, so again we are back in the 70s, he actually left London where he was born, and he moved to French Savoie, close to Geneva, to a very small village, a hamlet about 50 kilometers uphill from Geneva. And in his testament, in his writing, the motive was to document the disappearance of subsistence farming. No? So the experience of historical experience, let's say, of peasantry that he believed was drawing to a historical close, and he was to bear witness to this vanishing existence. And there are I mean, there is a very, very rich writing by him on this period. There are also films documenting him in this environment. I think The Seasons in Quincy, highly recommended, featuring also Tilda Swinton. And so one of the arguments that Berger makes in this opus is that I think similarly to your Shinto shrine, let's see, we should be looking closely and kind of salvaging these traditions, because it's precisely according to him, among other things, about the notion of progress. So he says that with this commitment to living on the earth, peasant has a different worldview than urban classes, and notably the proletariat. So all urban classes, also kind of including the bourgeoisie, etc., etc. So let's say the peasantry cultivates what he calls the culture of survival, and that is opposed to the culture of progress. And he describes the difference through the understanding of time. And he says that peasant has a cyclic view of time that is based on seasonality, nature's rhythms, and so on, that is opposed to the kind of linear time, which has a kind of a upward trajectory towards some, to say so, future horizon, however it is projected. And he says, by contrast, peasant is oriented to the past, not to the future. And he says his primary state of justice, so this is a quote, quite interesting formulation, primary state of justice is the past, before the onset of injustice, where that class was exploited in one way or another. So when he and his family are free to work without oppression. And I think it's interesting also that he says that by contrast, so the progressive class, how he defines them, for them, for the proletariat, the ideal future is the future without work. No? So it's the state of leisure, of consumerism, of abundance, and so on. And he says that this principle of progress oriented toward the future of plenitude without work and so on is the underlying ethos of all modernity. So whether socialist or capitalist. So ultimately, the only difference, he says, between the socialism and capitalism is in the content of progress, right? So how is this state of plenitude achieved via, to say so, engagement of artificial intelligence or other forms of, let's say, redistribution? And so it's a quite let's say, for me, it was a really striking figure and a kind of a striking effort by a person who was also, to say so, somebody who operated, let's say, in the kind of urban culture and in the context of high art his entire life. So I think that if we begin to talk about the kind of cyclicality here, right? So I think obviously we are also talking about material cycles, about closing energy loops, about the kind of no waste culture, and all those experiences that we could say traditional countryside could handle without any problem whatsoever, right? And I think to recover those experiences, I mean, we cannot essentially recover them because we live in urban societies that are at vastly different scales. And I think we are essentially, I believe, faced with a new problem, right? that needs to be creatively addressed. But certainly, let's say, those historical experiences are important. And I also like Berger. I mean, in a lot of my work, let's say, countryside is present as really as a source of I think learning, source of learning. Yeah. Although we also understand now that urbanization is a process which is not limited to cities. So it is not so that villages and agrarian landscapes are untouched. I mean, on the contrary, right? So, and I think this is also one of the points that Berger makes, right? So I think that is kind of a let's say silent transformation of life. I think anywhere through this, let's say, industrial forms of economy is probably I think a kind of a widespread European reality, right? So to kind of searching for the remaining spots of the rural, I think is really is a kind of a, let's say, could become a kind of a special obsession.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, this brings us to the next and our last term, which is domestic. So I was actually wondering, while we were discussing this term previously, on how to relate the idea of domestic to home, which was maybe something that you were very much attached to as a concept, right? And but firstly, just to get back really to the term of domestic, I really wanted to to address something which is important to me as well, and goes back to the movement of arts and crafts, right? Which actually emerged in the countryside rather than in the cities, basically, led by figures such as Morris, who are actually not against the use of machines, but they further the division of labor, a system designed which to increase actually efficiency, and to increase production, and which broke all the manufacturing tasks into small separate tasks in this linearity, which we call today lean, lean management, which is a line where everything has to function in a line, actually meant that the individuals had a very weak relationship to the result of what they were actually doing, about their work, about their labor. And this was basically, in his eyes, the wrong direction. Maybe his way of thinking is still very, very contemporary, more and more, even in intellectual services, which are done by people that are academics, basically. So not only, the ones that cannot go to universities, but even the ones that do are taught actually at universities, suddenly belong to a line of work where their work is just a little piece of a much bigger one, and they can be replaced at any time. And so, and this is something which also, socially speaking, and not only environmentally speaking, is a huge problem, because it de-responsibilize, I don't know how you say that, de-responsabiliser, the individual. So whether in arts and crafts, you had this, idea of a total interior, of a design which should address all different disciplines. So you had this cross-disciplinarity already very much present, where they would be able to revolutionize domestic spaces and give room for the first time also to women, actually, to be part of this design process. So not only consuming in some way, but also designing it for their own purposes. And this is maybe something which is a movement. It's belonging to modernity in some way, but maybe different type of modernity, a sort of organic modernity. I don't know how I would call it, which would rather also belong to protagonists such as Eileen Gray, or other figures and designers that certainly never gave up, actually trying to join both the idea of abstraction in design and the crafts. These were not meant to be opposed, never. No.
Of course, and I think since we are speaking about the domestic, right, and we are also, we are also architects, of course, and I think these questions are somehow, following us and looming, but let's say both through our work,
our own biographies.
Life. So I think it's interesting, perhaps, to bring this for the moment to the personal sphere, because architects are, and certainly, let's say, those of our generation. I mean, I think that there is a kind of among all of our friends, let's say Berlachi friends, or those that I'm in contact with. I mean, those people have in a way tried to design and build their own home, right? And very much along those ideas of kind of believing in and also in a way loving that kind of creativity and ability to shape one's own space, no? And I think that I mean, certainly, you know, we live in cities that are expensive, right? Luxembourg and Zurich, and I think that the kind of reality of real estate, and I mean, this is again where Leonor's work, I think, hits a kind of a interesting point, right? So I think that the I would say the realities of real estate market are in fact, I would say, pushing away the kind of either you know, the possibility now of home ownership, I think, for many people, and then ultimately the freedom of changing. I mean, this is not only the real estate, but also the let's say the various regulations around the home building, which I think in the Western Europe are rather stifling, you know. So let's say this kind of I think a playful need of shaping and building one's own home is more and more you know, out of reach, I think, for most urbanites that I know, right? And I think we, as architects, we are a kind of a
privileged kind.
let's say a small party of those who are trying to go against that specific reality, right? So I think, you know, if, I mean, perhaps you would like to say, I know that you also, you know, designed and built your own house. I mean, are there specific, are there some interesting experiences? I mean, we are still in the process. I can tell you a lot about that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think it's of course it's a great privilege. It's an incredible privilege if you can start to think about your home, whether you are an architect or not. Actually, it's something actually that many people just don't have the opportunity to do so. But indeed, I mean, while doing so, for once, for ourselves, for our family, we had, you know, these very, you know, essential questions on what would we expect from our house, you know. And since we designed our house quite late, you know, as an architect, because most of our friends, I don't know, but many of them, you know, managed in some way to do it a little earlier. We had actually this opportunity to live already a lot, you know, many years in different things. We had moved so many times, you know. So our question basically, what is our home? What will be this kind of point that we would like to create for our family? What would it need? Who would it need to serve? And and actually we realized over the design process that we were constantly changing and shifting rooms. So we realized that actually it's almost unforeseeable what the needs are. And so we needed flexibility, and we also needed a spaces which we would like to share also collectively. So that was something which really came up. So instead of having very big private rooms, at some point we thought maybe it's also nice to have rooms actually together, in order to cultivate this idea of exchange, being together, playing together, you know, listening or watching movies together. So these are all concerns which finally made up our quest for very simple design in the end. So we made a very normal house. Very normal, but of course trying to deal with these issues of circularity and materials, you know, how to keep the things in a loop, you know, as long as possible. I mean, all that was really part of our process. I don't know. I would like to share it with you actually in real time.
Yeah,
So.
it's interesting. I mean, I think that one very obvious I mean point about craft. I think that Leonor also underlines in many of her works in working with local craftsmen and so on. And I think that this. At least, I mean, here in our experiences, I mean, this is also an almost utopian undertaking, because I mean, I think it makes sense in the context of high art, but in the context even of architects building their own house, it's almost completely
Impossible.
out of reach, right? And I think this is even though we would be very very committed to it, but we've built small projects, for instance in Belgrade and in Serbia, where I come from, and now in Switzerland, and perhaps also in the Netherlands, and in each also we lived for a while in Singapore. And I think in each of these countries we are aware in very different ways how those craft knowledge or experiences, to say so, have moved into kind of highly specialized areas and are completely out of reach for let's say everyday use, right? So let's say, I think as returning to say craft into the domestic sphere, I'm afraid has become impossible, right? And I think that this is a kind of a linking back to William Morris, right? So it's a kind of a dream, or to Shinto shrine, right? It's a kind of a dream that essentially we are unable to realize, right? Either for the lack of knowledge, which is a fact, or for the lack of money, or for the kind of regulations working against you, or time is a problem, but one should have the luxury of time in order to be able, and so on. And I think we have also discovered, I mean, a team of recycling as a very potent team that I wouldn't have thought back then, or it perhaps, of course, we spoke also in the Berlachit 20 years ago about recycling, but I think we have discovered it really through the kind of effort of doing something, right? And I think that this kind of now pleasure of really salvaging something from being thrown away has become very important.
Yes.
This is also the kind of dialogue, with Leonor. I'm not sure if Leonor is
Listening
with us tonight, but it has been a great pleasure, and to engage with each other and with her work. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Milica. I think we have to stop now on these beautiful words, and we basically thank Leonor for her work, her contribution, and all the instigations that followed, and this opportunity that we had to reconnect through this talk and all the previous meetings, which was actually also made possible by Caroline Hoffmann of Mudam, who had this idea actually to make this conversation possible as well. So I think that we have now to stop this session. So I say goodbye to you, to your family.
Thank you so much.
All my best greetings, actually.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure. And thank you, Dora. It was really lovely to share this time with you.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.